It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. I got another great email from my friend Mike Cohn. I appreciate his emails every week. And he talked about when you need help with user stories, you should always start with a conversation. Now, we've all heard of the three C's. You have the card, the conversation, and the confirmation, right? And in this email, he focuses on the conversation. He says, take, for example, something I read on a website once. We provide bouncers for children's parties. What did you think of when you read that? I thought of a big, burly, heavily muscled man in a tight t shirt who won't let certain kids into the backyard clubhouse. It's kind of funny because words mean a lot, right? After seeing We Provide Bouncers for Children's Parties, I was left wondering what type of kids' parties need a bouncer? Were there really enough kids in need of bouncers that this company had formed to serve kids, families who need bouncers for their parties? But obviously, this isn't what the company meant when they said it. The company provides those big inflatable bouncy houses that kids like to jump in, and apparently those are called bouncers by those in the know. So this company really does provide bouncers for kids' parties, but not in the way that you might expect. I love how this started, right? It reminds me of the one that I read that it was about punctuation and the importance of punctuation, and it said, "Let's eat, Grandma," and then the next one said, "Let's eat, Grandma," and it was just punctuation, but it was the same exact words. And boy, those have two specific and different meanings, right? As much as I love words, words are imprecise. They don't always mean what you think they mean. So, for an example, Mike gave his definition of bouncer and a company's definition of bouncer, completely different, right? And part of it is because we weren't part of that industry. So, because words aren't as precise as we might think, an over reliance on written communication and written words can often lead to misunderstandings. Even if the words are exactly the same, but the punctuation is different, it can mean two completely different things. So, how do we get to the point where we are perfected in the meaning of what we're trying to do? The truth is, when you write, you need to do a little more. I mean, writing is great, and it's sometimes the absolute best way to convey something, but sometimes just having a conversation is better. Sometimes talking about it. I've heard so many people here recently, especially with people working remote, say that, sometimes you can't understand the tone of an email. And that's incredibly true. And you can't understand tone or body language of anything if you're just typing it in Slack. I had someone ask me about the daily scrum and doing it all in a Slack environment. I was like, ouch, and they're like, why? I'm like, well, I just don't think you can get that same body language, that same chemistry, the same level of communication, excitement around completion of a story, the same urgency around something that I need. It just doesn't feel the same if it's just something that you type. But one of the nice things about doing user stories is that if you're doing it correctly, it combines both. A user story does have a written element, and it should be well written, but it's often just a sentence or two on an index card because, quote, the story is a placeholder for a future conversation. And I think that if you look at a story that way and you say, I'm not trying to put every ounce of everything that I need inside of the written story, but I'm also not just having a passing conversation in a hallway about what needs to be done. The combination of both is what makes it successful. So when you think about those three C's, I'm going to go through them one more time. The first one is the card. Now, the card indicates a 3.5 by 5 index card that's very tactile. But the reason why it's talking about a card is because if it takes up more room than what's being written on one card, it should probably be multiple cards. And anything that should be multiple cards should be multiple stories because you're just asking for too much work to be done in one. Or at least that was the simplicity behind the card. Okay, the second one is conversation. We just talked about that. If you consider that the card is just a placeholder for future conversation, it makes it a lot easier. And if that conversation is in person, it makes it all the more better. You don't want to just have conversations that are written conversations only because a written conversation is merely just a substandard or a sub a substandard conversation. It needs to be something bigger and bolder and brighter and meaner. It needs to be something that's more true than just a few words written. Okay, last one's the conversation. The conversation revolves around a definition of done and the acceptance criteria to carry it on with that card. So sometimes when we're considering what the definition of done is and when we're considering acceptance criteria, we need to batten down the hatches and say, okay, here we are. And I think that if we get to the point where we are taking careful consideration around what it means to really understand and the difference between hearing what someone's asking for and understanding truly what they need, I think that that's going to help us to really dial in our user stories to be something that are effective because we're having the right conversations. Okay, so that's going to do it. It should be pretty easy. You need to make sure you understand the context of the story and make sure you're having the right conversations. And if you do these things, you're going to be successful in your Agile implementation. It really is that easy. Thank you all for joining us. If you have a topic you want us to discuss, learn more at agiledad.com. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.